So now we begin the grand finale here. We've talked about the male reproductive system, we've talked about the female reproductive system, we have looked at hormonal regulation, um, closing with how, in females, there's kind of this shift where we prepare for pregnancy and then not pregnant, go back to normal. Prepare for pregnancy, not pregnant, go back to normal. Every month they're kind of shifting back and forth between preparation and normalcy. Well, today we're going to look at what happens if we shift to prepare for pregnancy and then pregnancy actually happens and we have to shift to a whole new phenomenon. So let's look at what happens with pregnancy. First of all, the joining of egg and sperm. We've already kind of talked about this, but you may recall that eggs are produced in the ovary before birth, and once a month, from puberty till menopause, one of the eggs will randomly travel down the fallopian tube. So the egg's released, it's randomly traveling down the fallopian tube, and if the female happens to engage in intercourse during this particular time, then sperm that had been produced in the testes and stored in the epididymis is going to be released through the vas deferens out through the urethra. Now, the sperm is going to enter the female body through the vagina. It's going to travel up the cervix and then swim up through the uterus. And then the sperm is going to sort of fan out, and some cells are going to head this way, and there's no egg that way. And so their journey ends quite tragically with all the little sperm cells looking at each other saying, she said she'd be here. What happened? Kind of eating alone, waiting for that blind date that never showed. But these sperm that go this way are going to find that egg traveling down. And this is where fertilization is going to take place. So the acrosome, you may remember, contained enzymes that are going to help break through the zona pellucida, which is that outer part of the egg. And the sperm is going to slowly penetrate that egg and release its DNA into the cell. And there's some kind of fancy biochemical things that happen the instant this occurs that blocks out any other sperm cell from being able to inject its DNA. So one sperm cell is able to fertilize the egg. And when you're feeling down, you can always think back on this. We are all the descendant, the result of that one lucky sperm cell. Bajillions of sperm cells swarming around, only one made it, and we were that one. That's kind of cool. Anyway, where does fertilization occur? It actually occurs in the fallopian tube. So the egg is usually in the fallopian tube when that fertilization occurs. The egg, after it's fertilized, remember the egg is like, a small planet, a small moon here, and the sperm are just these little spaceships. So the sperm is tiny, the egg is huge. So the egg just kind of continues its journey even after fertilization. That now fertilized egg we call a zygote, and it begins to divide. One cell becomes two. Two cells become four, four become eight, and slowly it becomes what we call a blastocyst, and it implants in the lining of the uterus. And recall that that lining of the uterus, the endometrium, is thicker now. We've added blood vessels, we've added nutrients to prepare for this moment. So now that embryo is there, and that is where it is going to spend the next roughly 9 months of its existence. Some things a lot of people don't realize about the fetus. You can kind of see here how it's growing. It's actually upside down in the female body. At least it hopefully is. This is the normal positioning. And if it's upside down, that can be problematic. You can imagine during childbirth, if one leg came out but not the other, that's going to be really difficult. So this is how it's supposed to be. But let's talk about some things that protect that fetus. First, we've got the amniotic sac. This is a fluid-filled sac. Its job is simply to surround and protect and cushion the fetus. Note that egg-laying animals also use an amnion. It's just located inside the egg. So, the system in mammals where this egg attaches to the placenta is very similar to the system in birds and reptiles where it's just enclosed in an egg and gets its nutrients from a yolk, which is kind of interesting. When you hear about a woman's water breaking, by the way, that is this amniotic sac rupturing. And there's actually two different ways it can happen. In movies and stuff, whenever a woman's water breaks, it's always this big, whoosh of water. Actually, it's amniotic fluid that is leaking out in one huge gush. And it can actually happen that way. More commonly, though, when the water breaks, it's more like a pinhole leak. And so it's like, it's kind of a dribble kind of thing. And so it was described to me once by a mother as, it's kind of like wetting your pants over the course of many hours, So a tiny little leak, some fluid dribbles out, and then that pinhole kind of gets closed off a little bit so it stops, and then you shift and it opens up again. So that's more commonly, but once that amniotic sac ruptures, childbirth is imminent. The fetus has to come out for its own safety. Another structure that's important to the fetus is the placenta. This is an organ where the maternal and fetal blood exchange materials. Note that I've emphasized that word exchange materials. So what kinds of materials? The fetus is able to get nutrients and oxygen from its mother, and then it's also able to dump waste products into her bloodstream. Now, the reason why exchange is important, you'll notice this is the placenta right here, this structure. Here's the blood vessels from the fetus coming in, and they kind of dead end into the placenta. And then the maternal blood sort of pools inside that placenta. Materials are exchanged across the wall of these blood vessels here. The reason why we don't want the blood mixing is because that fetus, remember, is 50% dad. And so if the mother's immune cells were able to access the fetus, those blood cells would recognize the fetus as foreign and attack and kill it. So this placenta is kind of set up as a way to protect the fetus, even though it's getting all its nutrients from the mother. Very clever biologically. A lot of parasites do this same thing to hide. So I used to call my children the little parasites, and people who didn't understand the wonders of biology thought that was a negative term, but they don't understand how amazing parasites are. I thought that was a really complimentary thing, how they were able to evade the immune system of their host. Anyway, um, so yeah, we just talked about why not. So um, there's a lovely picture of the placenta. Just a couple other things about that. If you've heard the term afterbirth, that is the placenta. It is delivered after the baby is born. And so it's actually the body's only disposable organ, which is kind of a fun fact. It's made for pregnancy and then it's expelled from the body. You may have heard of eating the placenta. What's up with that? So, first of all, most mammals, I've heard all, but I'm not sure. Like, do whales? I don't know. For sure, most mammals eat the placenta. And so sometimes, like, I think Kim Kardashian, if we've heard of her, did something where she like fed her family the placenta on reality TV show. That sounds strange to me, but eating the placenta is actually a thing. Some cultures will actually, it's not like they're just like tearing into it, this bloody thing with, their teeth. It's cooked, it's prepared, and then it's eaten. There's also something called placental encapsulation, and they basically dry it out and then put it in little pills, and then the mother takes a pill, each day after pregnancy. Now, why would you, after the delivery of the child, why would you do this? Well, first of all, this hasn't really been studied all that thoroughly scientifically yet, but there is some anecdotal evidence that it may help with postpartum depression. And if you imagine, hormonal levels are here during pregnancy, and then they like drop suddenly and shift to this kind of different mode after pregnancy. And it's a very sudden jolt and change in hormonal levels. And so the theory, at least, is some of those hormones are in the placenta. And so by taking a pill, you're kind of getting a little bit of dose of those hormones. So instead of this harsh change in pregnancy hormones, it's kind of a slow tapering off because you're getting a little bit of them through these pills. Again, this hasn't really been studied anecdotally, but that's what it's about. That's the thing. When you hear people eating the placenta, don't get the impression of somebody just like tearing into this raw fleshy thing. That's not what we're talking about. The umbilical cord is another structure. This actually connects the fetus to the placenta. So here's the placenta attached to the wall of the uterus, and then this being the uterus where the baby is, and then here is the umbilical cord connecting it. And so you can see that umbilical cord there, and it's leading to the placenta. So this has to be cut after birth, and you can see that the placenta is attached to the baby, so we need to cut that off, obviously. And then note the coil structure. It's kind of like if you've ever been to a car mechanic's garage kind of thing. The hoses that they use are coiled up this way, and it kind of allows them to like stretch out and elongate. But then if you let go, they kind of snap back into that coiled shape. So the placenta has that same structure, basically to prevent it from getting tangled up around the fetus as it's, tossing around. And that can still happen, but this design sort of helps limit that. Um, have you ever heard that the way the doctor ties the knot determines if you have an innie or an outie belly button? Maybe you've heard that. If not, don't worry about it because it turns out it's false. That's not true. And the reason why is they actually cut it way out here. So when the fetus or when the baby is born, they cut it, and there's a few inches of umbilical cord still on there. And so you actually take your baby home from the hospital with this little nub, and then it slowly. This is a clip, by the way, that kind of closes off the flow of blood through it. And so this just kind of dries out, shrivels up, and then eventually falls off. And that's sort of the scar that's left. Kind of looks like a raisin is placed on the belly, but it's not a raisin. That's the scar. So, so that's kind of the deal with that. So obviously, if you're cutting it way out here, you're clamping it, tying a knot, whatever it is here, that's not going to have any bearing on what kind of belly button you have. So I think it's just a genetic thing. Um, so then I think I'll pause there, and then we'll talk about what happens to the mother in part 2.